Dark Souls 1 is obviously a great and iconic game, but of course it didn't do everything right. We know that it did have issues with time, where certain things had to be conceded on, other things had to be cut. So today we're going to take a look at the 5 worst bosses, at least what we think are the worst bosses, in Dark Souls 1. So if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe, but let's hop right into it. Number 5.
Yeah, the first one on our list is Ornstein and Smo,
No,
and then
it's
Gwyn,
not. No, it's
and then
not.
Artorias.
No, it's not. This guy's gone rogue.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, the first one on our list is actually the demons. Now, we say the demons because there are 3 of them in the game.
Actually, there's also the Taurus demon and the Capra demon.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so there's the Asylum demon, the
Yeah.
Stray demon, and then also the demon Fire Sage.
So we're talking about the basically palette swaps
Yes.
and move upgrade demons.
Yeah, because there's a lot of demons in the game, but these are all basically the same thing, which we found very boring.
Yeah.
You know, the developers of this game basically were like, well, we drew this one concept, let's reuse it again. And they're like, we need a boss down here. Let's make him red. There we go.
Yeah,
it's kind of boring, actually.
Isolith really suffered from the fact that there were a lot of time issues with the game.
Yes.
That's something that's going to come up again later in this video, but you can tell, yes, there's some interesting lore around characters like the Demon Fire Sage. But you know what would have made the Demon Fire Sage even more interesting? If he didn't look exactly like the Stray Demon and the Asylum Demon.
Right.
And the same can be said for either of them as well. They basically end up no more special than a common enemy, because you see him multiple times per playthrough.
Other games, you know, suffer from this at times as well, where we see reused bosses, particularly in Dark Souls 2. I know they reused a boss in that game, from this game actually. But this one I think is especially bad because it's in the same game and it's literally 3 times.
Yeah.
You know, which I think is just the epitome of laziness.
Well, I think if you had done 2 even, it wouldn't really be as big of an issue. You'd just be
been like,
oh,
okay, that's unfortunate, but whatever.
yeah, it's just an upgraded boss.
Yeah.
But basically you have the Asylum Demon, the starting one. Then you have later on the Fire Sage Demon, who actually has a lot of interesting lore. He was supposedly the first demon, although people also argue that that was the Ceaseless Discharge. And the Stray Demon, it's like, well, maybe he was a high-level demon. You know, he was imprisoned in the Undead Asylum. There's Black Knights around there. The Fire Sage Demon is just a red version of this character, essentially. And the Stray Demon is literally just the Asylum Demon.
Right.
Just buffed with a couple more moves.
Yeah. It's so lazy.
There's nothing to it.
Right. And the first time I played through the game, I thought the Stray Demon and the Asylum Demon were just the same thing.
You thought it just came back to life?
I literally was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess we're seeing this one again.
Number 4. It's the 4th one.
4.
Bell Gargoyles. Now, look, here's the thing. This was one that made the list because there's actually not 500 bosses in these games. I wanted to hit 5. I will completely admit that. I do not hate the Bell Gargoyles. This on the list is probably the least egregious to me. It's one of those ones where I think this boss fight is fine, but it's nothing special. And you had some real gripes against this boss, I know.
Yeah. So this boss has a really, really cool arena. Like, I think this is one of the coolest arenas in the whole game, actually. Probably top 5. But it's basically just generic gargoyles that come to life, and then they just fight you. Now, the problem with it is there's 2 of them, which I've always found obnoxious in Souls games. Like, for example, I know the worst part of this is the Man-Eaters and Demon Souls. I've always found 2 of a boss fight obnoxious. I find it annoying because you're sitting there, you're focusing on one of the bosses, but then you have to focus on 2 of them, and then they both are designed in a way that they kind of complement each other, usually. So you can't just focus on one to try to take down, you know, one first before you focus on the other, because the other one's annoying you the whole time too. And it's just very overwhelming, at least to me, and just very annoying.
Yeah, I mean, my thing with this boss is, can I beat it by myself? Yeah. I can.
Sure.
But do I want to?
No.
No.
Usually no.
Whenever I replay this game, you know what I do? I summon Lautrec and I summon Solaire.
Yeah.
And why do I do that? Even though people will argue it's the incorrect way to play the game. despite the fact that one of the whole reasons Miyazaki designed that was to make an intentional mechanic with jolly cooperation, regardless. Despite that whole fact, and it being the incorrect way to play the game according to Reddit, I just find it annoying.
Yeah.
Like, I just find it obnoxious. It's annoying. It's one of those things where I'm like, okay, well, I could deal with this, or I could just summon a couple NPCs, blast through this boss, and get to the better part of the game.
Right.
So that's what I do. I don't really have any need or desire to re-engage with this. There's a lot of bosses in this game. When I get to them, I think, whoa, this is going to be really fun. Mm-hmm. When I get to the Bell Gargoyles, I just think, all right, moving on.
Yep.
And that's not really a great, I guess, feeling for a boss fight to give a player. Just something to get past to get to the next thing.
Right. Yeah, and like the lore surrounding them either isn't really that in-depth or fascinating or anything like that. They're just literally gargoyles, and they attack you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. That's our big problem with this, is just the boss fight in general is boring.
It's not memorable.
No.
Number three. This absolute goober is a complete meme, and that is Pinwheel. This guy is a nerd, all right? This bookworm is sitting here in his little library of tricks and tips, sitting here reading through Brady Games manuals and old Sports Illustrated swimsuit editions, sitting here with his, other buddies inside his same body, and he's just chilling, and you come in here, and you fight him, and you kill him in like 3 moves. I mean, jokes aside, Pinwheel sucks.
Why he's so terrible, I don't know. I mean, I guarantee they designed this area, the catacombs, to have 2 or 3 different playthroughs through it. Mm-hmm. So I think they intended you to like start the catacombs, maybe get to Pinwheel earlier on in the game, and then you're done in the catacombs, and then come back later to fight Nito, kind of a thing.
Right, because the escalation of how much damage output these things do, especially when you get to things like the bone skeletons that roll into you.
Yeah. Well, and the problem with that, though, is the enemies before the Pinwheel boss fight aren't exactly easy.
I'd argue they're harder than Pinwheel by a lot.
They are,
especially
definitely.
because they gang up on you.
So my thing is, if you want players to come in through this area earlier on in the game, why'd you make the enemies leading up to Pinwheel hard? Like, they are obnoxiously challenging. They actually kind of are.
Yes.
And it's to the point where players will go through the catacombs, just die a ton of times, and then kind of be like, okay, whatever, I'll just explore another part of the world.
Well, also the fact that there's whole tutorials online about how to skip the catacombs by doing very specific drops.
Yep. Which
is awesome, you can do that. Mm-hmm. Cool mechanic. But I think when you're at the point where players are actively looking up how to skip that area of the game, you've made it a little annoying. Which is why a lot of people wait till later in the game to play the catacombs, but then by the time you get to Pinwheel, he is a joke.
Yes.
He's barely there. Like, he might as well not be in the boss arena.
Yeah, exactly. And when I first played through this game by myself, and I will say, first of all, foremost, I was terrible at the game. Mm-hmm. Like, I just was bad. It was my first Souls experience ever. I was bad at it. I came into the Pinwheel boss fight, expecting like, oh great, I'm going to die a bunch of times here. I killed him in like 3 or 4 hits. And to me, it was kind of like, is there a part 2?
No, that's it.
What's happening? Like, how did I beat this boss first try?
You know what's so disappointing to me is the potential around this boss and the interesting lore. So I think we'll make some videos in the future talking a little more about story and lore, but the TLDR is essentially that he drops a mask. It's either the mask of the father, mother, or child, and the masks say that he stole the power of the Gravelord. They actually talk about how this sorcerer stole the power of the Gravelord. That's interesting, because Gravelord Nito is obviously a huge prominent figure in the universe. What sucks about this, though, is that essentially there's a lot of these theories around who Pinwheel actually is, because when you first enter the boss arena, the masks turn to each other and they discuss with each other a little bit. They make noises at each other as if they're surprised that you're there, and they're like talking. But a lot of people think, okay, well, maybe this has to do with, the theories around him, that essentially this was a sorcerer, a necromancer that was trying to raise his family. That's why there's a mother, a child, and of course the father. That maybe it was the father trying to bring back his family. We don't know. There are 3 sets of arms on the figure, like you pointed out, when we were talking about it. But the problem is that there's no real canon explanation to that. The canon explanation is just that a group of the occult tried to steal the Gravelord's power, and the masks say that this Pinwheel specifically is the one who did it. But then you get down nearer to Nito, And there's a bunch of pinwheels down there that are also equally easy. And they suck. But this boss is creepy. When you enter his arena, he has creepy boss music, there's a creepy vibe, he has his weird lantern swinging around in the air. He actually has some cool moves if you leave him alive for more than 2.5 seconds to see them, but nobody does. So the problem is this whole boss is just absolute missed potential on every level. Lore, gameplay, everything. Balancing, it sucks.
Yeah, it's not a very good one. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of shocked with how did Miyazaki allow this in the game?
I don't know. I mean, they were talking a little bit. I was reading some of the DesignWorks interviews that have been, translated, and I think part of it was that they had deadlines. This game had to come out if it was going to be released. So certain things they did make concessions on. I kind of think Pinwheel might have been one of the problems because, again, like the demons, it ends up just being a reused asset. You know, the fact that there's pinwheels roaming around down by the Nido grave, or the Nido area.
Boss arena, yeah.
And it could have been something really interesting where you say, like, this is a for sure cult of people.
Right.
And they were all different pinwheels, and they went and did this and stuff. But it's not, and it doesn't make sense with the lore around the masks either.
Right.
Nothing makes sense about this boss. His story, his balancing... everything is just bad.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of bosses you can at least get to some lore explanations. You can try to develop theories. This one, it's literally all just speculation.
Yeah.
And a lot of different people have like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And to me, that when you already have such an easy boss, that just makes it a lot less interesting.
Right, because it just feels like he's unintentional.
Yeah.
I love his boss arena. Did you notice that he's in a giant casket? But what's interesting about that, too, is that this is essentially a mini library where you can tell he's doing some kinds of experiments. So this pinwheel is supposed to be an individual character, but we can't really learn much of anything about him outside of a couple tiny things. He had interesting music, a scary design, he's one of the creepiest looking enemies in the game, but because he's a pushover, you don't care. Number two, the numero dos.
So the next one on our list is Ceaseless Discharge. And no, I'm not talking about my nickname in college.
I was calling you that earlier today, after a couple rounds.
Right. It still lingers on to this day. I'm actually talking about the Dark Souls boss down in the Isth world. So this one is actually interesting because, first of all, neither of us really even knew that this boss had legs until like recently.
No, because you only see the upper half of him. I never really thought about it. I just thought he was a blob with tendrils.
That's what I thought too. I thought it was just a blob and it had tentacles on it. And I was like, this is kind of a weird boss. Like, this is just really stupid looking, actually. And
so we have the Miyazaki Mocker 32 from Reddit here in the comments.
So it's like, first of all, like the design itself is just odd. Now it's a little better now that I've actually seen like the full figure of him, I will say that, but it was odd my first time playing it. The second part of why I don't like this boss fight is I actually cheesed it. You can legitimately cheese this. Like, you can literally look up a video of it on YouTube, and basically you go to like the gate. Now I'm not going to remember all the details of it, but you basically go to like the starting location gate of this and wait there, and eventually the boss just like dies.
I didn't even remember this.
Yeah, I did it.
I do know that there's also another way to cheese it where you can basically move out of attack range of it and just keep moving back in and kill it.
It's also dumb that you can also cheese it the other way too. Like, there's multiple ways to get by this boss without actually fighting it.
Yeah, Isth again. The time constraints really made it suffer. I mean, you know what's funny? There's a lot of interesting lore about this one too.
Yeah.
He was confirmed to be the younger brother of the Daughters of Chaos. He was warped into a monster just like they were. Obviously, when the Witch of, Isth tried to actually recreate the first flame for Gwyn and preserve the Age of Fire, it basically created the Flame of Chaos, and that turned all of these people and creatures into the things we see now, like demons. Once you go to this boss, he doesn't attack you. He doesn't bother with you. He's just hanging out there. If you go and steal the gold-hemmed black set, though, which is near this boss, you are actually technically robbing the corpse of one of his sisters, and he will get outraged and attack you.
Yeah.
So this boss is very clearly still mentally there. But would you get any of that lore really out of it? Probably not. You know why? Because the boss is so lame that you're just going to beat it and move on and probably not care too much.
Right.
It really just comes off like a generic fire monster that just lives down here.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
Literally until recently.
I think that's the biggest problem with some of these bosses is that the more boring the boss is, or the worse the boss is, the more people miss out on the story around it because they're not really going to bother to look it up. They're just going to think, oh, generic boss. All right, this one probably doesn't matter.
Yep.
And they just will blast through and move on to the next one.
Right.
And it's unfortunate because bosses like this, or even the Demon Fire Sage, like we talked about earlier, they have interesting story. In a game as small as Dark Souls, it's not tiny, but you compare it to Elden Ring.
Yeah.
It makes sense that there's a bear you fight that's just a bear.
Right. Yeah.
That's
in
fine.
Elden Ring, yeah.
That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get to a game like this, where there's only so many bosses and the world is only so big, you start to notice when bosses are bad.
Right.
Number 1!
Splat.
So the last one we have is the Bed of Chaos. This might be your least favorite boss fight, I think you mentioned, of any Souls game out there.
Well, what's weird about it is I don't hate it.
Yeah.
I just want to say that really quick. It's not my least favorite because it makes me angry and I hate it. It's my least favorite because it is the most disappointing for reasons we're going to get into.
And for me, it's definitely in my bottom 5, maybe bottom 10 of worst boss fights I can think of. And the reason for that isn't really necessarily surrounding the lore or the looks of it or anything like that. It's because the boss fight itself is so obnoxious that you can literally die in this boss fight, not even from the boss. You can just fall through the ground.
Yep.
The ground is parts of, not the whole ground, parts of the ground are false floors, and you can walk over them, and there's no way to tell what they are, by the way.
It's like false flags, no way to tell what it is.
Exactly.
I hear about those all the time online.
So it's you could be just running around the boss fight and then just fall on the floor. It's oh, okay, now I have to start over.
And other times, because of how the branches of the boss move, they will just shove you into these holes.
Yep.
And then you'll fall through the floor and have to start over again.
Yep. Or, also, if you destroy the 2 orbs on both sides of the boss, and then you get to the point where you want to go to the center, you have to drop on a semi-small branch, and then run up this branch, which is pretty easy to fall off of. Most players, and I would actually venture to say probably 90 to 95% of players, aren't really going to die from the Bed of Chaos itself. They're going to die from falling off of something.
Right.
Or falling through the ground, which is just obnoxious.
One saving grace about this boss is it has a weird checkpoint system in it, where if you actually defeat those sides and you come back, you don't have to do it again.
Yeah, that is nice.
I don't know why, but I think it's because they knew this was bad.
Yeah.
But I think for me, the biggest problem with this boss is, again, missed potential. This is a super important character. This is a character in the intro cutscene. This is the Witch of Isth. And actually, it's also, supposedly, 2 of her daughters as well. Essentially, 1 daughter is each of the orbs. This is speculation, but it's pretty accepted. And then, the middle bug thing in the very center is what's left of the Witch of Isth, or her brain, or whatever you want to say. And she is possessing / has been turned into this big tree thing. That's essentially what it is. And on the surface, you think, interesting. But what sucks about this is there was actually an interview with Miyazaki and a bunch of the other developers, monster and character designers, stuff like that, in one of the Design Works books for Dark Souls, where they talk about the fact that there was originally going to be a King of Isth. This was going to be a 2-partish boss, and I don't mean 2-part phases. We don't really know about that. It was really just in the character design stage. And what it was going to be was the Bed of Chaos was down kind of on the floor, and that was going to be sort of the Witch of Isth. And then there was going to be almost a throne made out of this tree-like substance. And on the throne was going to sit this badass, really cool King of Isth. And he was going to be, the big boss in this area. It's just the Bed of Chaos was under him. It was part of it. So what did we get instead? We got half of that boss fight because of time. We got the boring part. They finished the bottom. And that was it. That's what we got. In the beginning game cutscene, this is something you mentioned with Nito that's so cool, is you see Nito, and then you fight Nito. You see Seath, and you get to fight Seath. You see the Witch of Isth, and you get to fight a stupid tree. The funnest part about this is how they used the slide mechanic on your way in, and you slide down a ramp. And you think, cool, I'm Tony Hawk now. That's it. Like, the biggest role-playing fun experience you're going to get is 10 seconds of Hawk, which unfortunately is probably what Tony Hawk called it when his kid was conceived.
That's probably the biggest disappointment about the boss is, like you said, you get to see Nito and Seath and all the, whatever, and you get to fight them, and it's awesome. It's neat.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
This one's just stupid. And my biggest problem with this is not even necessarily like the tree. Like, the tree itself is, kind of interesting itself. But when you finally get up to the main part of the boss, it's just a bug.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's just a bug. And you just hit the bug once.
This reminds me a little bit of a recycled version of the idea from Demon Souls. How when you fight True King Allant, he's this transform bug-like slug type creature. Right. Cool. Interesting idea there. But, they tried to take ideas from Demon Souls and improve on them. This was the opposite.
Yeah.
And actually, now that I think about it, this is very reminiscent of that, because remember, he was basically inside of the Great Old One in that. Mm-hmm. Inside of what? A giant tree-like thing.
Yeah.
And then you get here and you fight a giant tree-like thing and a bug, except it's more stupid.
Yes, right, and more annoying. Right, and even with the Demon Souls thing, you can excuse that bug, because if people could say, well, that was easy too. Yeah, but the main boss of the game really felt like King Allant to me. Mm-hmm. And the ending part of it just kind of was like a nice ending. It wasn't really meant to be like some big, huge, final boss of the game. And to me with this isn't even the final boss of the game.
Right.
So it just really has no excuse to be this stupid. It's not like you have like some big final boss and then you get to this part where it's, like some fun ending thing like it was in Demon Souls. This is just supposed to be like a really important boss to the game.
Right, one of the core characters in the universe that is
right.
responsible for why everything is the way it is.
Yep.
This was our 5 worst Dark Souls 1 bosses. We do want to make these as well for the other games. We do also make ones about positive things. We already made the 5 best bosses. So if you're here and you're a major Dark Souls fan, you made it to the end. We're not Dark Souls haters. We love these games. But this is just kind of the other side of the coin. If you enjoyed today's video and maybe you want to subscribe to see more content, maybe you want to get 12 inches of Venom or maybe 5 seconds of Hawk, whatever you want to call it, subscribing to this channel means a lot to us. We do also play through games over on our other channel, Degenerate Plays. That is in the description down below. Actually, links to all of my channels are, because we have more channels as well. But, we hope to see you there. Have a fantastic day. And as always, everyone, stay shui.